When I started updating Hex-a-Decimal, I added the version number to the main menu screen, and when I designed the visual for it, I knew that it could only fit one digit before running out of room. At that point, I decided that I would continue updating Hex-a-Decimal, incrementing the version number until I reached version 9, which would be the last update. 9 months after starting development, version 9 was out. In this video, I'll go over the final 2 updates and Hex-a-Decimal's eventual transition to Steam, with plenty of information and advice for aspiring indie devs looking to get their own game on Steam. This is Hex-a-Decimal Devlog 3, full steam ahead for my dream puzzle game. With 9 being the highest version number that could be displayed, I developed Hex-a-Decimal's updates with a simple timeline in mind. With each increment of the version number, I would gradually improve the game, and once the final number was reached, I would either stop working on it or make the jump to Steam. With all of that in mind, let's see how versions 8 and 9 would finalize the current iteration of Hex-a-Decimal. Looking at the changelogs and comparing them to the previous updates, you might be surprised that not much was changed. Controller support was added, bugs were fixed, tutorial text was changed, and one change was even reverted. The main reason for this was because there wasn't much else I could really add to Hex-a-Decimal, at least in the current iteration. By this point, I was sure that I wanted to put Hex-a-Decimal on Steam, and I knew that I wanted to start from scratch and remake Hex-a-Decimal to be better. So when I was coming up with new features, they were always for the Steam version for reasons I'll talk about later in this video. The problem with this, however, is that remaking Hex-a-Decimal and putting it on Steam, in any capacity, would take months, so until then, the itch.io page would be the only way to play Hex-a-Decimal, and because of that, it was important that I continue updating the game. Later in this video I will talk about how this benefits the game's future release on Steam, but before we can talk about the Steam version we have to cover how Hex-a-Decimal got on Steam in the first place. By the time version 9 released, I was confident that the next step would be to give Hex-a-Decimal a Steam store page, but I knew nothing about how one would go about doing something like that. Undeterred, I researched and began the process of setting up a Steamworks account. I don't know how much of the process I'm legally allowed to show or talk about, so I'll just cover the basics. The first step is to ensure Steam knows who you are, so Steam needs things like government ID and personal information for tax-related reasons. During this process, you also have to give them $100 USD to open your first Steam store page. But there was a brief moment in time where I gave them the money for the Steam store page, equal to $150 AUD, but I didn't have my Steamworks account yet. So if it got denied, does that mean the money just gets wasted? Either way, I'm glad it worked out alright. After my account was set up and my Steam store page was paid for, there wasn't anything particularly noteworthy. The only 2 parts of the store page that were difficult to set up being the art and the game builds. The art is self-explanatory. I'm not an artist, so when Steam forced me to submit a bunch of nearly identical artworks for the game, I just rushed some placeholder art, which is still currently on the store page, but I plan to change it in the future. As for when the placeholder art will be replaced and what it will be replaced with, that's a problem for future me. The only other difficult part of setting up a Steam store page was figuring out how to get game builds working. It was a long and complicated process which I'll probably have to relearn next time I need to do it. But let me tell you, the excitement I felt upon seeing Hex-a-Decimal in my Steam library and playing it on Steam for the first time made everything worth it. After that, all that's left was publishing it and getting as many wishlists as possible before the Steam version of Hex-a-Decimal releases. Alright, speaking of, I started work on the Steam version of Hex-a-Decimal almost immediately after releasing version 9. I have a whole list of features planned out, as well as many improvements over the current game, but let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Why did I decide to remake Hex-a-Decimal almost from scratch, just for the Steam version? Well, it all comes down to the many ways that the game can be improved by starting from scratch. For example, when making the first version of Hex-a-Decimal for a game jam, I needed a quick and simple way to make a decent looking main menu and level select for the game, and I did it by copying the code responsible for drawing the hexagon grid in levels. This reuse of code, sprites, and assets worked for making a game jam game, but for the Steam version I want to have a more complex main menu, which includes the level select menu, and that would be such a pain to implement that it would be easier to just start from scratch. There's also the code. Hex-a-Decimal was made for a game jam, and when I made it, I wasn't sure if I was going to continue working on it, and even if I knew I was going to continue working on it, designing a game as a long-term project is a fundamentally different process from putting together something for a game jam. Combine that with the consequences of continually adding stuff to the code and not having much of a plan for where the game was headed, and you get this spaghetti code mess that's impossible to work with. Now that I'm making the Steam version, I know exactly what I want the game to look like and what features it needs to support, and I can plan around that from the very start of the game's development. There are also some more fundamental changes with how the game works, but all my reasons for remaking the game for the Steam version come down to, if I want to make something worth selling, I have to make the game significantly better than the current free one, and if I want to make the game significantly better, it's easier to start from scratch. As for what will be in the Steam version of Hex-a-Decimal, and how much it will cost, well, I could talk about that for a whole chapter. What will be in the Steam version of Hex-a-Decimal? Here's the plan. The Steam version will have a free demo and a full paid version that costs about $15 AUD or $9.99 USD. Let's start with the demo since it'll be releasing first. The demo will contain 60 levels split into 6 sets of 10 levels. This allows the game to dedicate 10 levels to each of the 6 components, an improvement over the 50 levels in the current version. In fact, a lot of the early confusion in new players comes from the rushed nature of the first 10 levels, as the sensor is introduced in level 5, which sets it apart from every other component which is introduced in levels 11, 21, 31, and 41 respectively. Aside from having 60 levels, the demo will also have the level editor, which will not only be more powerful than the current editor, but also more user-friendly, as I am designing the editor and level menus together, and when I start playtesting, I will be sure to test the editor's usability as well. I regret not making the current level editor easy to use, but in my defense, not many people who play Hex-a-Decimal right now even acknowledge the editor in the first place. Another improvement that will be in the Steam demo is the increased resolution of the sprites as well as a slight change in the aspect ratio of the game. If you haven't noticed already, Hex-a-Decimal isn't wide enough to fill the entire screen. The game isn't short enough, so it needs to be shrunk by the computer and black bars are displayed on the sides to compensate. That wouldn't be bad by itself, but because the game's resolution is taller than the average display size, 1920 by 1280 when most common resolutions are 1920 by 1080, the shrinkage means that precise details can be lost. Now, this isn't that big of a deal, as long as I ensure that everything visually important is large enough to be easily read and or understood when displayed on a 1920 by 1080 screen held at arm's length. And as it turns out, I recently bought a laptop that's perfect for testing this. Anyway, one of the things that I've done to help mitigate this problem is shrinking the height of the game, which is significantly more difficult than you think it is. Take a look at this footage from the current Hex-a-Decimal version. I'll mark the borders of the screen as well as the position of the menu with these red lines. Now, take a look at this footage of the new version of Hex-a-Decimal. The increase in width of the screen and height of the level menu is because the game is being significantly less tall, and thus being able to fit more of its width on the screen. Now, watch as I overlay the first clip over the second clip, and highlight where I was able to cut height from the game. The reason I'm using the level as a ruler is because pretty much everything else in the game either inherits the layout, like the editor, or is made from scratch, like the main menu. So the only metric I need to worry about is whether or not I can fit the level and its menu on the same screen. Okay, that was a lot, and I can't promise things will get easier to explain, but I will try. The visual upgrades are self-explanatory, although I don't want to show the main menu just yet as it's still in a very early stage of development. So, with that, there's only about 2 more things to cover for the immediate changes you'll find in the Hex-a-Decimal Steam demo. One thing that I'm particularly excited about is the sound design and especially the music. I took extra care in designing the soundscape for the current Hex-a-Decimal and it paid off, as the audio is easily the most consistently praised element of Hex-a-Decimal. With the Steam release, I'm going to take it to the next level with a whole new ambient soundtrack and hopefully new sound design. Although currently I did import the sounds from the current version of Hex-a-Decimal and they work alright, so we'll just have to wait and see. Anyway, here's a taste of the new Hex-a-Decimal soundtrack that I have been working on. The level tracks in the itchio version of Hex-a-Decimal are named after base counting systems. Decimal, binary, hexadecimal, I mean, where do you think I got the name from? But in the Steam release, I'll name the level tracks after the components they introduce. So the track that plays in levels 1 to 10 will be called Conveyor, then Sensor, and the track you just heard is Pauser because it plays in levels 21 to 30. Since there are 6 sets of levels, 1 menu and 1 editor, that means that I'll be making 8 tracks for the demo OST. Speaking of the editor, I mentioned earlier that it would be more powerful in the Steam version, with even the demo's editor having more features than the current version. That's because the Steam version of Hex-a-Decimal has a feature I like to call color mixing. Yes, this is getting its own chapter. When I first made Hex-a-Decimal, I had to decide what rules the game would go by and how those rules would be implemented. Hex-a-Decimal is a puzzle game centered around a deterministic simulation, and it is important that the rules of the simulation be intuitive so that players can predict and make educated guesses on whether or not their solutions would work. Early on, I decided that a tile could only hold one signal, and when signals merge, they form, well, one signal. The implementation of this worked perfectly, until colors were added. Now, when 2 signals of differing colors merged, the game had to decide which color signal would quote-unquote win, and this slight change had disastrous consequences. Okay, maybe I'm overreacting a little bit here. I mean, the simulation was still deterministic, and this behavior could still be predicted, but that didn't change how I would come to feel about it. And so, my list of changes to make, of things to improve, of mechanics to add in the Steam version, only one thing stood at the top of all of them, and it was the solution to it all: color mixing. Basically, when a red signal and a green signal love each other very much, they merge and form a yellow signal. There are some problems with the way I implemented color mixing in terms of unoptimized code, but I'll cover those in a dedicated, I can't code video. The point is, it works. You've got red, green, and blue, and they can mix into all the colors you can make using red, green, and blue. And if you're colorblind, then I guess you'll just have to wait, because I have an idea of how to implement colorblind accessibility settings in the Steam version. I just haven't gotten around to it yet, but as I've said, I've had the benefit of hindsight when making the Steam version, so I think it shouldn't be that hard. So, that should cover everything that will be in the Steam demo when it comes out. But that's just the demo, right? I mean, for a demo to have that much content, the full game would have to be... I don't want to spoil too much, but let it be known that if I'm going to sell a game for money, you're going to be getting your money's worth. Since none of these features I'm about to mention are currently in the game, there isn't anything to back up my claims regarding what will be in the full version, but I am determined to implement everything I mention here. Currently, the demo has 6 components and will have a set of 10 levels for each component, totaling 60 levels. But in the full version there will be 12 components, with each component having a set of 10 main levels and various challenge levels that will branch off from the main path, meaning the full game will have over 120 total levels. The editor will also be able to create these sets, and the level editor itself will also be more powerful, with, for example, the ability to make levels larger than one screen in width and height. Considering that the number of components in the game will be doubled, there will also be more added features as well as more exploration of current mechanics. All of these features and more will ensure that the full game will be worth its price, even with so much content in the free demo. So, in my devlogs I mentioned giving advice to other indie devs, and while I do document my development processes with the intention of informing people, I feel like my videos are often lacking in direct advice and that personal touch that ties it all together. Of course, I can't say much about things I haven't done yet, so in the future I'll definitely be making a video about releasing a game on Steam. But if you're an indie dev seeing where I am now and looking for advice on how you could do the same, this chapter is for you. The most important part of game development, of course, is developing games, but I understand if it can feel hard to just sit down and make games. I'll assume you've already picked a game engine or programming language. I personally like GameMaker Studio 2 because it plays to my strengths and gives me tools where I need them. I import music from FL Studio, but I make all the art in the built-in sprite editor. Anyway, once you have a tool that allows you to make games, the next step is actually making them. My advice? Make a bare minimum game, and then start participating in game jams. If you go to my itch.io page and scroll all the way down, you'll find that my first 2 games fit this exact description. The first game I published helped me learn the basics of making and releasing a game, and the second game I published was a submission for a game jam. Now, my advice after this would be to not spend 3 years working on a generic platformer game. The reason I say this is because after making my first game jam game, I would then go on to spend 3 years working on a generic platformer game. So, what should you do instead? Well, after 3 years of stagnation, I finally went back to game jams, and that's what I suggest you do. Just skip the 3 years of stagnation and go straight to the game jams. Multiple short-term projects will always benefit you more than one long-term project. As for when you should go from working on short-term game jam games to full, long-term projects with the hope of putting them on Steam, I can't say for certain, but by the time I started working on Hex-a-Decimal, I felt like I had built up enough skill to take it all the way to Steam. And all I needed was a push, and that push came in the form of the overwhelmingly positive feedback Hex-a-Decimal received, combined with my confidence in the game's idea. So, if there's one major takeaway I want this video to have, it would be that learning is an iterative process. It was my philosophy when making game jam games, it's my philosophy when making Hex-a-Decimal, and it will be my philosophy moving forward. Speaking of moving forward, if you want to be the first to know any news regarding the development process or release of Hex-a-Decimal on Steam, definitely consider joining my Discord server. I post there semi-frequently and I love getting feedback from people, if you somehow couldn't tell. You can also download Hex-a-Decimal on itch.io and eventually Steam when I release the demo, but until then you can of course wishlist it. I am currently working on a Steam version of Hex-a-Decimal, and I expect to have the demo ready in the coming months. In the meantime, my priority is getting this video out, obviously, but also gathering wishlists for Hex-a-Decimal and figuring out when/how I want to release the demo. Now, I would continue the video and give a long rambly outro, but we both know that internet of yours can be put to better use, so go wishlist Hex-a-Decimal on Steam.